We begin in South Korea today, where a recent report by an independent commission has blamed past governments for atrocities committed in a state-supported institution. The commission has asked for an official apology from the government. More than 600 people were killed and hundreds of others raped, beaten, tortured and enslaved in Brothers' Home, a facility for so-called vagrants in Busan city. Most of these were children. It operated in the 70s and 80s under military governments which wanted to beautify the streets, particularly before the 1988 Seoul Olympics. Homeless people and children were picked up off the street, sometimes by police officers, and taken to Brothers' Home, where they were kept at the mercy of older inmates and guards. Many of those taken weren't even homeless. They were, for lack of a better word, kidnapped and thrown into a system of state-supported imprisonment.
Han Jong-sun was 9 years old when he was brought to Brothers' Home, a welfare center in Busan. Because of his short stature, he stood at the front of his row of children, directly witness to the abuse often inflicted by other residents who had risen to positions of authority.
The squad leader raised his club to beat the boy again when he had another seizure. The club hit him right in the head with a crack as he fell down. Blood poured from the head and there was a horrible smell. His body shook all over. The blood spread like water as he collapsed. His pupils were totally dilated.
Han Jong-sun did not see the boy again. For over a decade, Han has campaigned for the truth. Now he's working on a replica of Brothers' Home to shed more light on what happened there. Investigators now say 657 people died at the facility. Last month, South Korea's Truth and Reconciliation Commission confirmed evidence of slavery, rape, and murder at Brothers' Home in the 1970s and 80s that impacted tens of thousands.
It was confirmed that the human dignity of the detainees at Brothers' Home was violated in various ways, including forced labor, assault, abuse, sexual violence, and death. And it was confirmed that the government did not fulfill its duty to manage and oversee Brothers' Home.
Han recounts repeated sexual abuse.
The big bullies didn't have to share their beds, so they had lots of space. Space they used to sexually assault the pretty-looking ones they picked up during their free time. If they didn't comply, they dragged the boys to the washroom, beat them up, and sexually assault them there. That was our daily routine.
Han Jong-sun spent 3 years at Brothers' Home. A 1987 investigation into abuse at Brothers' Home was quashed under pressure from the then military dictatorship, which wanted to stifle dissent following revelations of other human rights abuses. However, these new findings following a 4-year investigation may force lawmakers here at the country's National Assembly to take a greater interest and pass legislation. Han Jong-sun says he will be patient.
If no action follows an apology, then it's just a show. For the apology to be sincere, there has to be a special law established for compensation, or no one will accept the apology, even if they promise to make one right now.
Survivors have been filing lawsuits for years, but Brothers' Home closed in 1987, complicating legal options.
Only about 600 applicants have so far come forward for the investigation. We need to first understand exactly who the 38,000 people were and why they were detained, and those who are verified to have suffered could be compensated for their damages.
Now, Han Jong-sun continues to add details to his reconstruction, hoping it offers more concrete testimony.
If people call this art, perhaps maybe it is, but I don't think it's art. But if that system can be seen with the eyes, then perhaps people could understand more easily and be more convinced. That inspires me to recreate what I remember.
Han's sister was taken to Brothers' Home with him. She did not fare so well. His father was brought later. Both have since lived in state psychiatric hospitals. Han Jong-sun now wants only to care for them.
이런 일들에 대해서
And for more on this, I'm joined by Si-Woong Koo, a writer and co-founder of the platform Korea Expose that reports on stories from the Korean peninsula. Si-Woong, the Brothers Home scandal isn't at all something one associates with the modern image of South Korea that we at least all have. How well known is this in South Korea itself?
Well, the fact that it's not so well known outside South Korea is unfortunate because it has been an extremely well-known story inside the country ever since the case first surfaced in 1987. I'm sure you know all the details of the horrific abuse suffered by those who had to stay in this facility, not to mention many people who died there. And as a result, there was a great deal of media publicity in the 80s and even in the early 90s. And what's made the story even more shocking in South Korea is the fact that the perpetrators of this crime were really very lightly punished. And the founder of the facility, he even went on to continue doing so-called charity work after he was released from prison. And the family continues to maintain a substantial fortune derived from this project.
There's so many aspects to this, but as you correctly said, the case already had come to light in 1987. What confounds me is that it's taken until last month for this call for an apology to be issued. Why has it taken so long?
Well, it shows to some extent how justice works in the South Korean context. Even when there are facts and there is an investigation, it does not necessarily lead to meaningful action or change. In the case of Brothers Home, we were still looking at the tail end of the military dictatorship in South Korea, and one that was facing considerable pressure from the various pro-democracy uprisings within the country. The dictator at the time, Chun Doo-hwan, was about to lose his power. And the government was very much invested in making sure that this new scandal did not add to the negative image of the government at the time. So it has been made known that the government also actively attempted to conceal certain facts of the story and also to minimize the judicial proceedings that took place thereafter. And of course, it's already a long time ago. It's 35 years ago, and people tend to forget. And many of the victims, they suffered severe trauma, and they did not really go make a very high-profile fight in the quest for justice. And in fact, many people credit one particular survivor for bringing the matter again to the public's attention around 2012. He staged hunger strikes, he wrote a book about his experience, and slowly the momentum started to build.
But for the large majority, is it safe to say, is it fair, unfortunately fair to say that the vast majority of victims were left to fend for themselves, forgotten and invisible?
Unfortunately, that's precisely the case. The victims who have come forward to share their stories say that they received absolutely no support from the state. And in fact, to the contrary, many public officials attempted to conceal what happened within Brothers Home, especially in the city of Busan, where the institution was located. The officials from the city government are known to have threatened survivors and told them not to go public with the story. So yes, they were indeed left to fend for themselves. Only this year, after the findings of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission started to gather attention, we heard from various government entities and also the city of Busan that they want to provide more support from now on, 35 years after the fact.
We'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us today. Si-Woong Koo from Korea Expose. Thank you so much.